Hey, Blake T. Wild here, and welcome back to the Ultimate Year, the era of time for my channel in which I'm primarily covering the original Ultimate Marvel Comics universe. And in this episode, I am finally answering the question that only psychopaths wonder. What's the origin of the Ultimate Marvel Universe? Through varying and tumultuous retcons, the team over at Marvel Comics, they finally did it. They deduced a way to explain just how this grotesque, violent, edgy, gritty alternative universe kinda began. And they got Brian Michael Bendis to do it because he's probably the most sane option to pick from. But before I get started, I need to let you know something, and that is that I will be attending Tucson Comic-Con, booth AA183, August 30th to September 1st, the last weekend of August in Tucson, Arizona. And this will be the first ever appearance and release of the Custodians Agents of Cross, issue number 2, Winging It. The Custodians Agents of Cross is my own original comic series. These books are over 50 pages of pure comics. It includes an entire soundtrack and dozens of fake advertisements throughout each issue. I'll also have available a second print run of the Custodians Agents of Cross number 1. If you missed out and you're in Tucson, you can pick up both of them. I'll be releasing the books on my Etsy shop after the convention, and I will also at the con have all 5 issues of my original comic series, Destructo Boy, a zany sci-fi fun for all ages tale about a little robot who saves the day. Along with that are going to be posters, stickers, buttons, original art, business cards, and more. So stop on by, say hi, booth AA183 at Tucson Comic-Con, August 30th to September 1st. Also, don't forget to leave a like for the origins of an edgy alternative universe. I'm never good at coming up with these. Released in 2008, written by Brian Michael Bendis with art by Butch Geis. This is Ultimate Origins. The book begins in a Manhattan dockyard as a strange shirtless man in big purple pants rambles to Spider-Man that everything is connected, and that's the secret that they don't want Spider-Man to find out. And this is actually a continuation, weirdly enough, of Ultimate Marvel Team-Up number 3 that came out 7 years before this book. Then Thaddeus Ross and the U.S. Army storm the building. Ross orders Dr. Banner to stand down, and Banner freaks out and hulks himself out. And then he launches himself, also he's green, out of the building and across the river as the army give chase and leave the area. And Spidey just kind of sits there alone and watches as they disappear. Flashback time, get ready for that. During the Battle of Tenaroo, during the Pacific Campaign of World War II in August 1942, a rugged American soldier who's wearing an outfit that looks somewhat similar to Citizen V's carries a flag in one hand and his automatic rifle in the other. He leads a charge against the Japanese, rallying the men behind him, and then he's gunned down and killed. And a photographer takes a photo of his body, splayed over top of the American flag. Sometime later, President Roosevelt looks over the photograph and demands that they produce a real super soldier. And a year later, during the invasion of Sicily, Privates Fisk and Fury scrounge around in a bombed-out home alongside a Canadian soldier named Howlett. The trio are currently working on breaking into a metal safe, and once they've blown open the door, begin to pick out all the valuables they can, they're discovered by a commanding officer. Fisk attempts to flee and is shot in the leg as Howlett attempts to tell them that he's actually Canadian. But they don't listen, and Private Fury and Howlett are then roughed up and tossed in the back of a truck and shipped off. Sometime later, Nick Fury is imprisoned God knows where, and he's sent to the black cells. And eventually, in the middle of the night, a mustachioed man in a trench coat arrives and state that he wants Fury. The military police then drag Nicholas J. Fury, aka Test Subject 41 of Project Rebirth, through the prison and into a hidden technological facility. The mustachioed man, Dr. Erskine, announces to his fellows that Fury's blood sample matches Subject 22, whom they previously had their largest success with. The MPs strap Fury down and restrain him just in about every way possible, and Fury looks to Erskine and demands to know what the fuck is going on. And then he injects Fury. And everybody waits in silent anticipation as Nick Fury begins shaking, rattling, his eyes rolling back into his head, and Fury screams in a heated, animalistic panic. And then he explodes out of the machine with his newfound strength. I assume that whatever machinery is going on in this giant chair thing just went haywire when he broke out of it, because What does this mean? Looking at the pages, though, I get the sneaking suspicion that the colorist probably embellished this a bit more with, like, the fiery oranges and yellows. Unless Nick Fury just, I don't know, combusted internally. Fury then violently breaks his way out of the facility and escapes outside, where he discovers he's in the middle of New York. 2 months later, in Alberta, Canada, Mutant X erupts from a tank and stands before 3 soldiers and a scientist named Cornelius. Howlett escapes out of the base and runs wildly into the snow as he's followed by soldiers, and they're ordered to shoot to kill, and they follow those orders. Then they make their way to his corpse and watch as his body regenerates. Radio orders them to bring Howlett back before he wakes up. In 1946, at the Weapon X base, Dr. Colcard explains how, in their attempt at making their own super soldier, they accidentally created something entirely new and totally different. They created an entirely new genome, a mutated strain of the human genomes that they like to call the mutant genome. That's right, mutants in the Ultimate Marvel Universe were just served up on a platter by humanity themselves. James Howlett is the first ever mutant. Humans created him. It's no different from the atom bomb. Humanity created something that it would then go on to fear for what its wake may have upon the world. How does this apply to Ultimate Apocalypse, I hear you ask? I don't know. He's crazy. He's an entirely different entity altogether. Did he just call himself a mutant, maybe? He's from a different dimension, possibly. That's not the first time that's happened where another reality's villain came to the Ultimate Universe. I don't know. That's the fun of a poorly constructed world building, is that you can just kind of make up your own headcanon. Anyway, the scientists then explain that he's very interested in finding out just what happens when the mutant gene spreads, and explains how mutants are how humanity will survive into the future. Cut to the future year of 2000. At the Project Pegasus base in Wyoming, the Fantastic Four arrive with acting director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Carol Danvers. She has really nothing to do in the Ultimate Universe, aside from she leads S.H.I.E.L.D. for a little bit. Anyway, she leads them into the base where they meet S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Wendell Vaughn. In the mainstream Marvel Universe, Wendell Vaughn is known as the original Quasar. Anyway, he tells acting director Danvers that a distress call was sent out because something top secret happened. And this facility is where S.H.I.E.L.D. just kind of tosses all the junk that they don't really understand what it is, all the mysterious objects of strange and mysterious origins or unexplainable power that they can't make one way or the other of. They just stick it in here. It's the warehouse from Indiana Jones. And Agent Vaughn leads them to this, a strange alien totem monolithic obelisk thing with eyes carved on each side. And it's apparently been stowed in the base for decades, and for some reason, it just activated this morning. Glowing red eye of the Watcher gazes upon them. Yep, here's another crazy thing about the Ultimate Universe. This is what the Watcher looks like. The Watchers, I suppose. They're a strange living statue entity that can just kind of appear whenever or wherever it so desires. Maybe this is just, it's a higher dimensional being, and this is just what it looks like to us when it crosses the folds of dimensionality. I don't know. I like it. I think it's a cool idea. It's weird and creepy. Anyway, flashback time, 1942. Steve Rogers sits at a cinema and watches newsreel footage from the European theater when Gale sits in front of him with her date, who is preparing to ship out. You might remember her from The Ultimates, Volume 1. Anyway, she tries to make small talk with Steve, who awkwardly responds, and then they're shushed by the theater goers, and Gale's date pulls her back and tells her to can it. The cinema continues to play as Steve quietly gets up and hobbles out of the theater and heads into the snow-covered streets. He has a bum leg, by the way. Steve then tries once more to enlist at a recruitment office, but is refused. He begs for anything. Even working as a recruiter would be enough for him, but the recruiter tells him to go get a job at the factories, something that Steve refuses to do because that's where the dames work. And then the phone rings. The officer answers, listens, and then instructs Steve to head through the back door. And behind it is Sergeant Dugan. He opens the door and invites Steve inside. Then he asks Steve just how many times he's visited their offices. And he lets Steve into a locked door at the end of a hall that leads to a dark stairway. And Duggan reveals that they have a file on him and that he's read it a couple of times before he and Dr. Erskine have finally agreed that Steve Rogers is the perfect candidate for Operation Rebirth. And it's exactly what you expect to happen, pretty much. It's a bit longer than the original Captain America. There's multiple, treatments and testing that goes on. And finally, on the day of the final treatment, Steve is hooked up into the machine of Project Rebirth. The injection is successful with all vital signs and acceptable ranges. Steve just begins tensing, and then he fucking explodes, too! What is wrong with this fucking super soldier serum? Why does it make everybody explode like they're on fire? Clearly it's a running thing, because it didn't only happen to Nick Fury, it's now happened to Steve Rogers. And Steve Rogers stands in his new body, catches his breath. Then a guard shouts, "Hail Hitler!" and casually shoots his handgun. Look at this. Why is it... Where'd all the energy go from the previous panel? He looks like that pistol shooter from the Olympics. Steve is shot in the shoulder, and Erskine is shot through the fucking head as the Nazi spy attempts to escape, but Steve launches a metal tray directly into his neck, and then leaps up to the catwalk and punches him so hard that his fist goes through the metal. Scientists and military police break out into a panic as medics are ordered to the Project Rebirth lab. Guards make to secure the Nazi spy's body, and then someone shouts in fear. And as though it appeared out of nowhere, a strange statue with a glowing red eye watches on. Back in the now, Reed Richards inspects the Watcher as Carol wonders if it could be possibly a weapon. Elsewhere, everywhere, the Watcher appears. At Tony Stark's mansion, aka the home of the Ultimates, at the reconstruction site of the Triskelion, on the patio of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, the Baxter Building, the Daily Bugle offices, London, Kel's kitchen, Peter Parker's attic, all of the places that are influential for Ultimatum. Flashback time, roughly 30 years prior in Alberta, Canada, Mutant X is ripped out of his containment chamber and hoisted midair. A young man with long brown hair stands before him, and he tells Weapon/Mutant X that his name is really James. The mutant test subject roars in a feral anger from behind his breathing mask, and then Eric rips open his palm, and all of the metal explodes from Wolverine's restraints. His mother calls out for him to stop, and she's followed by a handful of Canadian soldiers. Eric asks why she looks so scared of him, and then he smashes the helmets of the soldiers, crushing their heads. Mrs. Lensher cries out for him to stop, and Eric tells his mother that her life's work was nothing but torture. And she retorts that her life's work is actually to help find a cure for the mutant disease. Which does raise a bit of, a couple of questions, I feel. Because this would roughly be about the 1980s or so. Meaning that James Howlett and the mutants have only been a thing for roughly 40-something years. A little under 40 years. Is she just lying flat out to Eric, aka Magneto, the future Magneto, about what she's really doing? Because she does tell him that he also has the disease, the mutant disease, and she just wants to help cure it. So, it's either does she truly believe in that, and that's what she's doing, or is she just, did she and her husband, who are scientists for the program, did they subject their own son to the X-mutant genome and really regretted it? It doesn't matter one way or the other because he does kill her. And then we move forward in time to about the turn of the century. Professor Charles Xavier speaks to a class of bored students when he picks up on a voice calling out to him. Charles looks around and sees a man standing at the back of the room. And Charles thoughtfully asks why he can't read the man's mind. And Eric realizes that he didn't even know that was a thing. He's as surprised as Chuck is. Which means that for some reason, Charles can hear Eric's thoughts to him. They imply that Eric is specifically directing these thoughts at Charles Xavier, and that Charles isn't just kind of picking them up in the area. But he can't look into Eric's mind, which this all it means, seemingly, that Eric Lensher of the Ultimate Universe has some sort of natural telepathy, but is also naturally immune to an extent to telepathy, or telepaths, other telepaths. Perhaps it has something to do with his magnetic powers. Maybe it's like a kind of force field that he creates just naturally. He himself suspects that each of their powers might counteract each other. It is an interesting idea, I think, because Magneto in the original comics did have some kind of limited telepathic abilities, which Claremont and later writers just completely ignored, because it really didn't fit how mutants are depicted in the mainstream Marvel Universe, and that is that they have one very specific power. I know what you're going to say, oh, but what about characters like Legion? Well, his one very specific power is that he has a bunch of powers. So it didn't really fit to have Magneto have some telepathy and then also the magnet thing. So they just made it the whole metal magnet thing. But I like it. I think it's yet another interesting idea that the Marvel Ultimate Universe could have had that never went anywhere, just like a lot of things in this series. And it doesn't fucking matter, because in about a year of when this issue was released, Magneto's gonna be fucking dead. Anyway, after class, the two walk around the San Francisco College campus as Eric explains that he's a fan of Charles's book. Charles says that he hoped it would have made a little more impact, and then asks how he knew that Charles was reading his students' minds. And Eric says that he can always tell when a mutant is using their ability. Then he explains his own abilities, and Charles asks to see. So Magneto takes Chuck to a back alley and shows him what he can really do. Lift up and crumble some trash bins. Then they continue walking, and Eric explains that he and some of his like-minded fellows want to make Charles's idea of a place where mutants can gather, train, and cultivate a race a reality. Cut to the Savage Land. 2 years later, Charles Xavier is making a return trip after having been gone for some time, and they arrive back to a compound of their Brotherhood. Charles brings up how his goal is to integrate humanity with mutants, and this kind of seems counterintuitive to isolate themselves further and further like they're currently doing. Eric reveals something that he never told Charles before: his backstory! He tells him about how his father got drunk once and tried to kill Eric when his mutant abilities manifested, and then Eric killed him. And about how his parents were Canadian Weapon X agents, how he freed Mutant X, the rumored mutant of fabled lore, who had been experimented on by humanity for decades. And Eric tells him that humankind is not ready for mutants, but they will be, eventually. And then they share each other's minds, and Xavier casts a mental image into Eric's with a schematic. And Eric builds the first citadel of the Savage Land. And unbeknownst to any of them, a monolithic structure in the forest is watching. Cut to Kuwait, circa the Gulf War, sometime in 1990 or 1991, I'd imagine. A beaten, hairy man lumbers his way through the desert carrying a black man on his shoulders. Check out what that's all about in Ultimate X-Men Volume 2, video available on my channel. Sometime afterward, Nick Fury lies in a hospital bed, now missing his eye, which for some reason is one thing that won't regenerate, as Thaddeus Ross stands at the foot of his bed. Ross reveals that he did some digging and discovered Nick Fury's little secret. And then he tells him how he can't believe how good he looks for being over 90, and he also can't believe how fast he recovered from his wounds. Ross then asks him about Project Rebirth and if Fury was actually the one who got away, as rumor has it. And if so, why the hell did he come back and use his real name? Fury says that it's the name his mother gave him, and it's the only thing they couldn't take from him. Fury gives Ross the rundown of what happened to him in these past many decades, how he turned his life around and realized that the abilities he gained from the Super Soldier program actually allowed him to have a second chance at life and better himself. Ross reveals that the president is very interested in reinstating the Super Soldier program, or at least a version of it, and 1 year later, Nick Fury is in charge of this program. He meets with the best brains that money can buy, and before him stand Dr. Franklin Storm, Richard Parker, Bruce Banner, and the recent MIT graduate, Hank Pym. Fury then reveals to them that they are starting just above scratch, and they have a single vial of blood that they will need to reverse engineer and do what they do to get this thing up and running. Then he orders them to get cracking. And back in the now, the FF and S.H.I.E.L.D. inspect the Watcher, and Director Danvers is alerted that more of these things are appearing randomly around the world, seemingly. And Reed posits that it just kind of seems to be observing them, and maybe it wants to communicate. Flashback time! Project Rebirth 2, aka the Super Soldier program, is not going well. Until one night, Dr. Bruce Banner says that he finally has it. The others come around to look at his work, and Hank suggests that they show it to Fury, but Bruce tells them that the second they do that, it's going to be handed over to the army scientists, and they'll never see it again or get any credit for this. Later that night, everyone except for Bruce and Hank have left, and Hank says that he'll be the first human test subject. But Bruce refuses to let that happen. He'll do it. As the sun sets over New York, Hank runs down towards the parking lot and gazes out to make sure that Storm is gone, and he watches as Richard Parker leaves the building and meets his wife and their newborn son at the car. A little bit goes by, and Richard unwinds as he and his wife make some chat, ask each other how their days were, what they're going to do for dinner tonight. Then Hank Pym races out of the warehouse in fear. Richard climbs up to the doorway and tells Mary to get in the car, and he slowly enters the building, and then a shockwave of unadulterated force erupts, and the facade of the warehouse is decimated. Mary and her son Peter Parker are knocked to the pavement as the Hulk is unleashed. The Hulk stares down at the baby and turns and looks around, realizes what happened, and reverts back to Banner. Because, as we all know, whenever you take the super soldier serum, you fucking explode. Banner begins to break down and falls to the ground, where he stays there for, I don't know, an unknown amount of time. And then he's swiftly kicked in the face by Nick Fury. Fury calls over medical and picks up the baby, telling the kid that it wasn't supposed to be like this, and that the good news is that he's too young to remember any of this. Yes, this does kind of contradict with what we know happened in Ultimate Spider-Man, but it's easy to just say Mary and Richard just got injured, but they survived. It's really not a big deal. Back in the present, Reed Richards speaks to Tony Stark about these strange monolithic alien obelisks. Tony reveals that Thor hit it and nothing happened, and that his scans have just accomplished nothing. They're not getting a reading on these things at all. And unfortunately, no one is paying any attention to Sue Storm as she stares into the eye, her own eyes glowing the same orange-red hue. And then she tells them that it watches, and that it is a watcher, a part of a hive culture that is sent here to observe and record the significant events that will shape Earth's culture, and it is here now to witness the most significant event of this generation, to witness the coming devastation. Reed begins communicating with the Watcher through Sue, and she explains that it won't harm them or anyone else, and then reveals its name, Uatu. Yep, that's him. In this universe, he's a weird little statue. Reed asks about the coming devastation to Earth and what form it's going to take, and Uatu says that it does not know. It simply observes critical moments, the birth of new heroes, of a new species, for example, and that Uatu of the Watchers shall pick a herald with the which they will guide the New World Order. Flashback time! Nick Fury leads a S.H.I.E.L.D. covert ops team to the Weapon X base in the mountains of Alberta, Canada. Fury instructs that this is a shoot-first situation. They break inside and discover the true horror. They initially expected that this was just an illegal assassin training camp of some sorts. But the reality is far, far worse. They barge their way through the labs, shooting down guards as imprisoned and experimenting mutants scream in pain. Fury places everyone inside under arrest under the authority of S.H.I.E.L.D. and clocks the head scientist in the face. Another scientist runs up and grabs Fury and tells him that he has no authority here and that he better enjoy this moment because he won't get to have another one after what he just did to the head of the facility. Fury demands to know who the old man is, and the woman tells him that he's Dr. Malcolm Colcord, head of Weapon X. Colcord exclaims that they have created a new life here, and that he will be embraced by the American government for his scientific breakthroughs, while these S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are going to have their careers and lives ruined. He was the man who created a new species. Fury asks what the fuck he's talking about, and Colcord reveals that this is where the mutants, Homo Superior, were really created. Fury stands in silence as his men hold the scientists at gunpoint, and then blows Colcord's head inward and out. The scientists panic as Fury orders everything and everyone to be destroyed. Fury explains that if the world ever found out about this place, about what mutants really were, mass pandemonium. Then his men conduct a full sweep of the facility. Fury walks over to a young black man fastened to an operating table, and learns that his name is T'Challa Udaku. As Fury prepares to pull the trigger against his head, he refuses. And after the full sweep is completed, Fury carries T'Challa in his arms as he and his team leave the burning ruins of Weapon X. Flashback time! Savage Land. Charles Xavier is fucking impaled by a goddamn spear, and Magneto tells him thoughtfully that they were placed in a war the day that they were born as mutants, and that if Charles chooses to flee to those who would enslave him, so be it. So be it if he would rather use his powers to get inside Eric's mind, to attack him in his own home. And Eric tells his old friend that mutants and humans cannot live together in peace. For God himself has selected mutants to be the dominant species, and God's will shall be done. For some reason, they make Ultimate Magneto super religious and Christian for some reason. I suppose he's Christian. According to Juggernaut, Magneto has the 10 Commandments tattooed on his fucking back. I don't even know what to say. In the present, Uwatsu informs the FF that their herald has been chosen, and then she collapses, Reed catches her, and in a way that just defies all logic, reality, or anything in our knowable existence, the Watcher ceases to be. And Carol informs them that the other Watchers around the world have disappeared as well. And Johnny wonders who they picked. Cut to the Midwest United States. Marion Jones calls out to her son, Rick, and searches the whole house for him. She asks her daughter where he is, and she tells him he's in the backyard, so Marion looks out the window and sees smoke, fire, and her son screaming. Marion and her daughter race out into the backyard to find young Rick Jones, fully nude, glowing bright, burning gold, collapsed in a smoking ruin in their backyard. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode of What Is. Let me know what you thought of Ultimate Origins in the comments below. It's not a cosmic origin or anything like that. It's very reality-based as much as it can be, I suppose. And it's kind of a crazy story. It's a bunch of neat little vignettes that are, you know, told through the narrative device of the Fantastic Four sort of inspecting the Watcher and Uatu. Of course, the Fantastic Four are going to be the ones to do that. It's Uatu. They kind of gotta meet him, I think. We do want to point out real quick that Rick Jones in this picture looks like Will Poulter, funnily enough. This is an enjoyable 5-issue series. It reads pretty fast, even though there's a lot of Bendis dialogue, not traditional Bendis dialogue, just so much as there is a lot of writing, I suppose. But it goes by quick. I really enjoyed it when I first read it many years ago, and I think it's very entertaining. It helps, like I said, it does help that it is written by Brian Michael Bendis. Like I mentioned earlier, I love the visual of the Watcher. It's just creepy and off-putting, and this 100% just leads directly into Ultimatum. Canonically, this is supposed to be like a few days before the first issue of that book, I think, and that's just something crazy to think about. It's a fun story. I like the sort of origin of Wolverine. I know that might be a bit surprising and controversial to like the ultimate origin of Wolverine, where he's the first mutant, and that mutants are this fucking just experiment gone right or gone wrong and released out into the general public by Weapon X. It's a cool concept. Again, it's another cool concept that really just does not come into play at all in the Ultimate Universe. That is the tagline for fucking every goddamn book in this world. The Magneto and Charles Xavier stuff is really cool. Those are just two characters that it's pretty hard to get wrong, I feel. Just about every interaction between those characters from any universe, I think, are going to wind up to be interesting, especially at this point where they're on the same side. I would have always liked to have seen some more of their early days in the Savage Land, I guess. I can't remember if that ever really comes up again later on in the Ultimate X-Men series. I can't imagine it does. Nick Fury kind of becomes an Ultimate Isaiah Bradley, which is neat. I like that retcon that Nick Fury had a proto super soldier serum in him, and that he's also been around since the 40s. That's just a really neat idea, and it's very similar, to the original Nick Fury. But I don't know, something about how it's done here. It has that extra tinge of mystery, probably because we didn't have the whole running series of Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos like we do for the mainstream universe, so we don't really see a whole lot of what he was doing in the between times, and also the Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. series. So the Ultimate Nick Fury becomes this more mysterious figure, and then we're like, oh shit, he's actually been around since 1940s era. But overall, this is a very fun and enjoyable little lore update to the Ultimate Universe. And again, let me know what you thought in the comments below. Come by Tucson Comic-Con, August 30th to September 1st, booth AA183, and say hi, pick up some books, see all the little stuff I got. As always, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/Smokey'sVideos, BlakeTWild.etsy.com, and follow me on Instagram @NotBlakeWild. And I will see you guys next time for another Ultimate book. Bye!